Hello, everyone. Thanks for checking out this special episode of Really Dicey. This is Manny, and I'm here with.
Hey, I'm Brian Saliba from Crowbar Creative.
And I'm Craig Schaffer with Crowbar Creative.
And today we're going to talk about Monty Python's RPG. Wait. It's not actually called an RPG. What is the actual name of this?
Monty Python's Cocurricular Medieval Reenactment Program.
So first things first, how does this exist?
I think it started 30 or so years ago when Craig was watching Monty Python with me next to him, but too young to understand any of the jokes, playing D&D with his friends, and me standing at the table that was up to here on me, and too young to understand what any of those things were. My love for both of those things was born in those days, in the mid 80s probably. They've continued ever since, and I was talking to a company about doing some licensed RPG stuff for another project, which didn't come to fruition. In doing so, I come to find out I've learned that they also represented Monty Python, and I asked, would that be a possibility? And they said, yeah, sure. It wasn't as easy as all that. It turned out that it took a lot of back and forth. It took a lot of explaining what a role-playing game is, a tabletop role-playing game, and how they're played, and in particular what our vision for this one was, and how people would be interacting with the Monty Python content and canon. And good 2 years of that, and eventually we had the license and were able to actually make this thing happen.
When I see this, so I'm looking at the cover right now, my brain thinks, okay, this is going to be a Holy Grail adventure, but it's not just Holy Grail. This expands like the whole Monty Python universe. Am I correct about that?
That's right. Yeah. Naturally, it begins. The game begins with a lot of Holy Grail references and context, but very quickly. Very Python-esque way of there's the crossing of different worlds and realities rather quickly during the game.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, it's the game is based in medieval England, so it is going to feel very Holy Grail at first blush, but the idea of making just a Holy Grail role-playing game wasn't super interesting to us. It just seemed like kind of low-hanging fruit. And what was much more interesting, the higher-hanging fruit, was trying to make a game that encompassed all of Python, that made there is obviously something to the word Python-esque. There's they have certain sensibilities and approaches and hallmarks that I think. I remember Terry Jones at one point had a quote where he said, the fact that Python-esque is in the dictionary means that we actually totally failed at everything. Because all they ever wanted was, not all they ever wanted, but one of the main things that they were going after was unpredictability, and you didn't know what was coming. And the fact that they ended up creating something that you see it and you just know it's Python means that, he might say they failed, but I think they really succeeded in creating their own kind of way of seeing the world. And that's what we wanted to do, is try and capture, that all into one game. As Craig said, while it starts in medieval England, there are any number of ways in which things are going to get very surreal, are going to get farcical, are going to have parody and satire and strangeness that will make it hopefully feel very Python. And you might end up, one moment you're in the forest of Mercia chasing after the Grail, and the next minute you're in a television studio in the 70s on a quiz show, or having to deal with some other strange anachronism, like a history professor walking onto the screen or the set or in the middle of your game, or a salesperson suddenly walking on, or whatever. There's all kinds of stuff that happens that hopefully makes it ultimately feel like a Python role-playing game, not a Holy Grail.
Okay, so let's talk a little bit about the style of the game. Now, there's not too many role-playing games that break the fourth wall. I probably the one that stands in my head, in my mind, is Hackmaster from maybe 25 years ago. What's the style like for this game? Is it an actual like full on game? Is it more satire? What's the style of the game like exactly?
Craig, I'm gonna let you have a run at that first.
Style of game. You mean like mechanics or the atmosphere?
The atmosphere.
The atmosphere. Yeah, I kind of attaching on to what Brian was saying about when you think you know how things are going to go, there's an absurd element that just arises in the situation. Um, like I was saying, you might go through a castle door and find yourself on the deck of a rolling ship, and from then on in the game, that door in that castle will always go to the deck of the ship. And then we could talk about the other layers of it, where it is a medieval reenactment program for pedagogical purposes of teaching British history, and starting with the medieval period where really England was forged by these brave men and fertile women. So this is this reenactment program, however, is in the framework of a BBC programming, which is also a training program for the professor to eventually leave teaching to become a BBC programmer. And so the game is kind of, directed by an executive at the BBC who has certain tastes and things he or she likes to see in the game. And we've invented or pulled from the Python material 20 or so different personalities, known or unknown, that the game master is going to assume the personality of during the game. So they're not going to be just a neutral referee saying roll this or roll that. They're going to actually have a role to play with certain personality traits.
Yeah, I think you mentioned a key phrase there, Manny, which was fourth wall breaking, and there is a lot of self-reference in this game, and I wouldn't call the game I mean, we didn't intend to make a send-up of role-playing games and just to make it a giant farce or parody of role-playing games in general, but there certainly is some of that, in much the way that Python would break the fourth wall or would make you think that there is a certain fourth wall and then change it because suddenly, the screen backs up. And actually, all of this was happening on a television show in a middle-class home in East London, being watched by two pepper pots. There are a lot of those kind of strange layers built in, where Craig mentioned a couple where the conceit is that it's actually not a role-playing game at all. This is a course of study for students of English history. And the person running the game, the GM, which doesn't apply it, they're called the head of light entertainment, is actually meant to be their professor. And so that's the way the book is, that's the way the game is kind of presented. And that, all right, you're a teacher and these are your students. Of course, that's never going to be the case. I can't imagine this being used in classrooms, but there's a lot of that kind of fourth wall breaking and self-reference and changes of perspective, where there are a lot of things that suddenly the players might be challenged to come up with something from the real world in a quiz show or roundtable, hard-hitting news show, television format that they weren't expecting. I think there are a lot of ways in which this does parody role-playing games, but hopefully, if we've done what we set out to do, it is also in and of itself a functional role-playing game. It's not just one big joke or play on role-playing games. There are certainly some things we attempt to subvert, as Python did a lot, but I hope it actually just, if your group prefers it, you can just play it as a role-playing game. It's going to be weird. There's no getting around that, I don't think. But it's more than just for us, it's more than just a one long joke about isn't this funny about role-playing games, let's make fun of it here.
Yeah. There are a lot of people who won't realize that that's actually potentially exploitable. They'll just enjoy the game, but it's also not based on just going from quest after quest. Mainly, you just be continually sidetracked. Is kind of the way I'm imagining that it may go.
Yeah, I think we wanted to. We tried to make the game so that people who don't have a lot of role-playing game experience, but who just love Monty Python, would be able to pick it up and play. So it's, when it comes to the rule system, it's pretty light and open to interpretation. You know, if you put one-page RPGs on one end of the continuum in terms of complicatedness and rules weight, and something like Traveler on the other end, we were aiming for something like 0 to 10, 10 being the most complex and rules heavy. We were aiming for something in kind of the 3-4 area, where it works as just a sit and play game. You know, you got your friends over and say, hey, let's break this out and have a quick session. This will be fun. But we think that it's also possible to play it for more long-term campaigning and multi-session play. But we definitely didn't want the barrier of entry to be too high, because we think there are probably a lot of people who like Python haven't much experience with role-playing games. We wanted to make sure it appealed to them, but we also wanted to have enough, I guess, crunch and grist for the mill that people who are role-playing game enthusiasts, but maybe don't know much Python, at least apart from Holy Grail, which all RPGers seem to know about, that there's enough there that they would be able to enjoy it too. I mean, it can't be everything to everybody. So I don't want to. I know it's not possible to make all of those people happy and think this was perfect, this is made just for me, but we tried to strike somewhat of a balance there.
Oh, yes, we can. It's the god of role-playing games.
Yes, there we go.
It's not a role-playing game. No, it isn't.
You can see Craig is a much better pitch man than I am.
Well, you sort of hinted that this game was going to be a rules light a bit. And what's great about Exalted Funeral is that a lot of their products tend to be, I guess people could call them rules light, but they tend to be very creative rules at the same time. I mean, no game that comes out there is exactly alike in any way. Saying that, what can you tell us about the rules for this game then exactly? What can you share with us?
Yeah, I think you're right about often, I think when it comes to role-playing games, I think creativity dies on the altar of making sure there's a rule for everything. You know, those things usually work against each other. You can have a rule for absolutely every little choice that you might be able to make, and the DM has a checklist or a table for absolutely every little thing, and okay, if this character with these certain abilities attempts this thing, then this is what I have to check, and right, this is the roll that must be made in the number, and so forth. And often those kind of games, not always, but often those kind of games tend to be more about, you know, min-maxing, and when players are faced with a choice, the first thing that they do is look down at their character sheet and try and figure out, okay, what can I do? What can I do? And I think a lot of the kind of old school games that and weird lit games that Exalted Funeral puts out tend in the other direction, where it's you know, rules are, as you said, creative, but also encourage creativity at the table. And those are the kind of games I know Craig and I prefer to play. So that's what we ended up making here, is leaving things open to interpretation and to some extent, and not trying to write a rule for every single thing you do. I remember early on when we were talking about this game, we were trying to figure out way early on what to do about the rules. You know, I mean, there's something very un-Python about rules, and we thought there were kind of two options two paths we could take that would still feel very Python. We could write a kind of 17 volume rule set that has a rule for absolutely everything, and the most absurd thing. If you want to lace up your boots, here's a 16-page rule set for how to do that. And it's so absurd that it would feel very Python. Of course, nobody would read it in doing that. That would be
But
just
so many things can go wrong with the simplest activity.
but you know, that was obviously a kind of a farce. I mean, that was a lark to think anybody would want a 17 volume, you know, $8 billion or 8 billion word treatise on absolutely everything. But that would
And
be
that choice would be that it would be funny to read, but not fun to play.
exactly. So then we thought the only other way to do it is to try and be as rules light as possible, while still providing just enough crunch to kind of get you off the ground and get your creativity going, and the creativity of those around the table going without overdoing it. And so what we have, I mean, the characters themselves are pretty simple. I mean, there are 10 different classes. We call them situations, but there are 10 different character classes, each of which is made up of 5 traits. And depending on which class you choose, some of those traits come with that class automatically. And each trait comes with a choice of items from a table. So if you choose Valor, then you can either roll on the table or just choose from it a piece of martial equipment that goes with that trait. So in choosing your traits and building, rolling your character, so to speak, you're also equipping them at the same time and deciding what your kind of loadout is going to be. Then you could also, each class has a few traits that you can just choose from among this list of things. You must have this, you must have this. Choose from among these for your other 3 slots. Or instead of, if you want to only choose 3 traits and instead have a retinue member or a conveyance, a cart, or another
hot air balloon.
A hot air balloon, yeah. Then you can choose that instead. You have fewer traits, but now you have this thing that gives you this other stuff. So the character creation, I think, is pretty simple, pretty fast, and pretty open to interpretation in terms of what your choices are. And in terms of how conflicts of any kind are resolved, and there's a dice chain mechanic where each of your traits exists on a continuum between serious and silly. So if you have the chaste trait, then on the serious end of it is chastity, and on the silly end of it is naughtiness. And depending on where you are in that 7-stage continuum, you have a different die associated with it. So if you have a D12 in chastity, you're considered neither really in terms of chaste or naughty. If you have a D18 in chastity, you are considered at that moment anyway to be quite chaste. And so each of the continuums has you're either a bit too really, quite, rather, a bit, or neither really on that continuum for each one of the things. And there's a die associated with each one. But those values change all the time. They can change with every roll, because if you fumble a roll, if you roll a 1 using when using a trait, then you've spammed it, and that means that you have to move move toward the sillier end of your continuum and roll that lower die every time thereafter. But if you max the roll, then you've struthed it, and you move it one side toward the serious, one step toward the serious. And so those values change often throughout the game. And there are also other things that happen when you struth or spam a roll, but in general, that's how the dice are used and how the conflicts or tests and traits and things like, or
And
tests.
there could be other situations that cause you to move your trait on the continuum as well. External things or bad things that might happen to you, about people you've met, or something good happen, you do something good.
Right. Yeah, there's a number of there are a number of dire consequences. So each of the heads of light entertainment that Craig talked about, which is the persona that DM takes on, has their own list of dire consequences. And if you trigger one of those, it can be anything from a giant foot comes down and squashes your character into oblivion, or the studio audience that's watching revolts and charges the set and messes everything up, or a complaint letter is generated from the television audience at home. All kinds of strange things happen if you trigger a dire consequence, and many of those result in your traits being moved one way or the other. They can also result in you incurring a bit of death, which is our hit points, or a bit of loony, which is, kind of two sets of hit points, your health and your mental fortitude, and those things are also impacted by dire consequences and losing fights with monsters and so forth.
When you say dice, do you mean the typical D20, D10s, D6s type of dice?
No, we've actually got the full dice chain from 20 to D4.
Okay.
So 20, 18, 16, 14, 12, 10, 8, 6, 4, all the way down. So some funky dice in there between 12 and 20. There's also a D30.
Hopefully they'll be color coded, because between 14 and 16, people don't really have the habit of having those around.
Yeah, they are actually all color coded, and the colors for the a bit dice on both the serious and the silly side have kind of inverse colors, but they're both related to each other. So it tells you that these are both the a bit dice, and the quite dice are related in the same way. And also the custom dice that you can get with the game, all of the one spaces are replaced with a foot. So it's easy to spot when you've spammed a roll. And all of the highest numbers have a different font as well, so it's easy to spot when you've struthed it. But the entire dice chain is something that comes, well, you can get with the game if you want, or source your own, D8 or D18s and 16s and 14s. There's also a D30. Which is used only for what are called special serious abilities, which are things that each character class has a particular special serious ability that they can use, and when they use that, they roll a D30 and hope it goes well.
Okay. So just to expand a little bit what you mentioned before about characters, skills, and the rules behind it. What can you be exactly? Do you start off as knights? What are the options exactly?
There's 10 of them, and I don't have the list in front of me, but I bet we can. I bet we can do this if we try, Craig. So
you can be a king.
Yeah, they're monarch.
Might not have a very extensive kingdom, but that doesn't matter. You can proclaim yourself king.
Right. I mean, as we learned in Holy Grail, most people don't even know who their king is. It's really anybody who declares themselves to be so and has a lot less shit on them. It's really all that you need. So there are monarchs. Monarch is a choice. Knight, obviously a choice. There is the ne'er-do-well, the peasant, the cleric, the enchanter, the monk, the nun, the hermit,
troubadour.
Troubadour, thank you. I don't know. We got to be close to 10 there.
Pretty good.
One or two out, but yeah.
Okay, excellent. Let's talk about the artwork. Now, the artwork for all the Monty Python stuff has always been very unique. You could tell what it is by looking at it and where and so forth. How did you have to replicate? Are you replicating that art style for this book?
Well, replicate, no. We're using actual Terry Gilliam art for a lot of the book, and we've got a 3 or 4 great artists that we've hired on to do the rest of it. But we wanted to make sure that each of the artists had their own style. We didn't want, and I don't think their management really wanted an artist to come in and try to do Gilliam art. We wanted art that would look good next to Gilliam stuff, but not try to be Gilliam. So, but we also, in the book, every chapter has its own theme and design sensibility. So if you've ever seen Monty Python's books, they like these two, brand new Monty Python Paffer book and the Big Red book, very eclectic design. One page does not look anything like the next page. And so so what we did for this book is every chapter looks quite different from the one previous. Like the background chapter, which tells you kind of what's going on, who the factions are, and all that stuff, that's going to look like an illuminated manuscript. And the character creation and head of line entertainment, the players chapter and the DM's chapter, basically, those are going to look like an old English textbook that's been kind of vandalized by a kid, with notes and stuff. The bestiary chapter is going to look, or does look, like a kind of an old field guide for naturalists, for like spotting animals in the wild. The introduction chapter is going to just look very Python. It's going to be using pretty much only Gilliam artwork. So, but different artists for each of these sections, so that they have their own look and feel, and different layout people in some cases for each section, so that they feel like their own self-contained thing from one chapter to the next.
If I may ask, how many pages do you envision this being?
Well, I mean, right now we're planning on 250. We have so much content that I think cutting it down to 250 is going to be
brutal,
a big job. Yeah. But I think there's going to be a lot of content that gets cut that will hopefully come out in some other form as modules later on, if we want to support this going on with more stuff. So, and we have, God knows, plenty of content to draw from. So at the moment, it's an 8x10 hardcover, 250 pages. I can imagine that going up quite a bit until Exalted Funeral says that you stop. That's enough. We can't have a 700-page book. Stop. So,
yeah. But yeah, I think that's the margin from 250 to 700.
Somewhere in there. Yeah.
Easily. Yeah. But again, there's so much good material that lends itself to creating interesting situations, not always just absurd situations, but often. But there's so much interesting material. And one thing that was important to us too, I'll just mention, is that we didn't want to create situations where the gamers will go into a sketch and just regurgitate what they saw in the movie or in a flying circus episode. But we just want to have like a toolbox of a bizarre person with a secret phobia and and an accordion on a chair, and just see what happens.
Right.
That kind of thing. So.
Yeah, it's a great point, and we just don't think anybody wants to play a role-playing game in which you are now King Arthur facing the Black Knight. How's this going to go? We all know how it goes. We've all seen the scene 1,000 times. So the Black Knight is a character in the game. So is Arthur.
Got better.
Yeah, he did. He got better. He recovered. He wasn't nearly as dead as everyone thought. I mean, he never thought he was dead anyway. So, but Arthur's in the game. Those characters and characters from Flying Circus and from their albums and their books and otherwise, they're in there. doing things, and you can interact with them, but in your own way, without necessarily just trying to replicate scenes and rehash jokes that we all know the punchlines to already.
And there's also stuff from Life of Brian, but since Life of Brian happened so much earlier than medieval England, Brian had this brilliant idea of extrapolating through time what would happen to there's a Roman legion that's still in England, lost, and doesn't know that the Roman Empire has been gone for 1,000 years. And there's also the two religions that you might remember about the sandal and the gourd. Well, they've actually developed into rather important religions in medieval England. So the people can interact with those as they see fit.
Yeah, it's a world in which the all of the things in the films happen. So what we saw in Life of Brian, that happened prior to the dawn of the Middle Ages. And so there's Christianity, sure, but there's also Brianism. That still was a thing. And Brianism is splintered off into a bunch of different sects, the sect of the gourd and the sect of the shoe and the sect of the sandal. And there's the Wastwegian that is in northern Wales, entirely oblivious to what's happened to the empire, as Craig said. So that's one of the ways in which material outside of medieval England makes its way into the game. Is well, we know what happened in the Roman days because we have Life of Brian, and same really for stuff from Meaning of Life too. I mean, that's most of that stuff is more modern, but those characters are still there, and still ways to incorporate stuff from all kinds of all the different material. You know, what we didn't want to do either was have a role-playing game in which there is the land of Holy Grail, and then you travel to the land of Meaning of Life, and you travel to the land. You know, we wanted to have it all be in the same pot, so to speak.
Oh, okay. You mentioned, well, and we talked about dice, but let's talk about the Kickstarter campaign that you're working on. So you mentioned dice. What else do you expect to see? Any stretch goal ideas, or what are your plans so far?
There's a lot. There are a lot of different SKUs, I guess. So there's the Sensible Middle Class edition of the book. Well, actually, first there's the Bloody Peasant edition of the book, which is PDF only. Then there's the Sensible Middle Class edition, which is the standard hardcover. And there's the Public School edition, which is the same the same material on the inside, but much more ostentatious and pretentious on the outside, meaning leatherette cover and debossed gold foil stamping on the cover and so forth. But then beyond that, there's all kinds of different bundles of stuff. So there's the dice, the set of dice we said. There are merit and demerit tokens. So as Craig said, each of the heads of light entertainment, the persona that the GM takes on, has their own sensibilities. There are things they go in for and things that they don't like. And if their sensibilities are offended, or if you ever spam a roll, then you get a demerit from your program facilitator, and they hand you a demerit token, or you can just mark it on your sheet if you don't want to buy the tokens. It's fine. If you accumulate enough demerits, then that's when you roll on the dire consequences table. But if you really please your head of light entertainment, if you do things that accord with their sensibilities, then you earn a merit token, and that can be used to sort of grant advantage on a roll or to cancel a demerit so that you can avoid the dire consequence table. So anyway, those tokens are a thing, and they come in a bag and all that. There is also a whole mini game, backgammon-based mini game called Fetch a Lavash. And we actually have a set. It's a backgammon board that has custom art on the inside and outside, and the game itself uses backgammon rules to some extent, but it's, has this Python-esque spin on it, and it comes with meeples that use Gilliam art that are in place of the tiles, the backgammon tiles that you move around the board, and two teams are kind of racing to capture the cow at the far end of the board and return it to the other side, and all while dodging farm animals that are being launched by the French at you. And those farm animals are simulated by, we have dice catapults that launch the 2 6-sided dice that determine how you move your player around the board. So that's a whole game set there that's part of the Kickstarter. It's the board, the meeples, the dice catapults, the dice, and also includes all the normal backgammon stuff. So if you just want to play regular old backgammon on it, you can. The tiles and the doubling dice and all of that. And there's also, excuse me, a head of line entertainment screen, a GM screen. And this screen has interchangeable, so it looks, you can see the torso of your head of line entertainment, but the top is die cut. So it comes with 14 different heads of the different heads of line entertainment you can slot in there to remind your players who exactly is the persona that the GM is taking on, and also help the GM themselves remember who they're meant to be portraying. Not, you don't have to act and use voices if you don't want, but just what sensibilities you're meant to be taking on. So that's another bit that is part of the Kickstarter that people can avail themselves of if they're interested. We have some stretch goals around the GM screen. So if we hit a certain level, then we'll add some pop-ups to the screen, one that says on air. So if you trigger a television program that suddenly you're all interacting with, then GM can pop up the on air symbol. The other pop-up is God. So if God ever pokes his head out of the clouds and speaks to the characters, you can pop that up to tell people, and it'll have a little dial on it that keeps up with, if we hit the stretch goal, that keeps up with how many complaint letters the head of line entertainment has received. Because if they receive too many, they get sacked, and you have to roll to figure out who your new head of line entertainment is. Not who your new DM is, but who the new persona that your DM is taking on is. So, and let's see, the merit tokens come with embroidered bags too. I think that's all the bits and bobs that come with it, or that you can get with it. There's also we have a first 48-hour backer special, which is a head of line entertainment sash that the head of line entertainment can actually wear, because there's nothing quite so pretentious and impractical as a sash. So if you back in the first 48 hours, you get one of those for free. And it uses the kind of old BBC
logo.
Yeah, logo and kind of scrolling. People who've watched old BBC or watched old Python Flying Circus episodes will recognize the idea instantly, and it says Head of Line Entertainment on it. I'm not sure when this is going to go live, but it's basically for people who back between this Wednesday, the 19th, and I think Friday, the 21st, we'll get that for free.
Okay.
I think that's all the bits that come. We do have a lot of other stretch goals too, and hopefully we'll get there. But those are all the stuff that are available on day one of the Kickstarter.
Okay, well, excellent. All right, again, this comes out on the 19th October 2022. Is there before we wrap up this interview, is there any last words, anything you want to say before we wrap up?
I had just one thing really quick about the style of play, kind of going back to that. It was important to us in the conception that, as Brian was saying earlier, your resources and your answers are not necessarily and often not on your character sheet. But we want people to stay present at the table with one another. And a lot of the rules light is that the head of light entertainment can decide that if a good idea has been presented, then it works. There's no need to roll dice for every single gesture that the players might make. And if there's some risk that something could go wrong or very right with this idea, then it's worth rolling dice. But try and really foster the storytelling and the presence of the people around the table, and not constantly shuffling through papers to see how can I win.
Yeah, Craig, what is the head of light entertainment meant to declare if someone has described an course of action so well that dice roll isn't necessary?
Intercourse the dice. Which means, yeah, let's move ahead here.
Yeah, well described, beautifully done. It works. No need to roll a dice. And the truth is, doing really, really well, rolling super high isn't necessarily a good thing. Because if you take things too seriously, well, we'll not have any of that either. So it's not always the highest you could possibly roll at any given time. Anytime you roll higher than a 20, or as a result of truthing and continuing to roll with the exploding dice mechanic, you end up with a result higher than 20. Well, that's a dire consequence for you, because you've gone and taken things a bit too seriously, and no, we can't have that. So getting a hand wave, getting an intercourse the dice can help you avoid the consequence of potentially critting your roll, which isn't necessarily always a good thing.
And then everybody stays in the story.
Yeah. But the idea is that look at what happens to King Arthur when he goes and takes everything a bit too seriously at the end of Grail. He calls up this army, and all of a sudden it's like, oh my gosh, this is going to be like a really serious battle scene. Look at these guys, and the close up of their faces, and they're gritty, and there's a blacksmith hammering, and there's siege weaponry, and it's like, oh my gosh, this has gotten really serious. The cops show up and arrest him. Like, and that's kind of what happens. That's a potential dire consequence. Is the colonel walks on, no, won't have any of that, or the constables come on and drag you away, or whatever. I guess my final thought is, I think some people, when they've heard about this game, had people mention that, yeah, but comedy RPGs don't really work very well, and my games are already silly. Like, why would I want to do this? Or this won't work because you're forcing people to be funny at the table. Like, people can't just be comedians suddenly at the table. And I agree with the idea that comedy RPGs are really hard to pull off. Like, it's better to create an interesting situation, and if comedy comes out of it, great, instead of trying to shoehorn comedy into the game and force everybody to suddenly, oh gosh, I better be funny, or I better come up with a good one-liner. And so the way I respond to that is that we never set out to make a comedy RPG. Like, that was never our guiding star for this. All we set out to make, and at every key decision point, this is what we came back to, is we just wanted to make an authentically Python game. And I think that's an important distinction, that when we had a choice to make, we never asked ourselves, what would be funny here? What would be the funniest thing that could happen here? We always asked ourselves, all right, what would be the most Python thing that would happen here? And I think that as a result, I hope, and in playtesting, this has proven to be the case. It's not the players being forced to be funny around the table and come up with zingers or over emote and all of that. It's just the situations that arise as a result of the various mechanics in the game, and elements and story elements and otherwise, and their own character choices, that end up being entertaining or just weird and surreal, which is another part of Python. It's not all just in-your-face comedy, I find. A lot of it is just very strange and makes
or philosophical.
Or philosophical, yeah. or subversive in some way. But there's also slapstick humor, fish slapstick humor. I mean, there's all kinds of, the word comedy, I think, is just very, very broad. And there's all kinds of ways in which I think the game can be fun and entertaining, I hope, without it being a comedy RPG, you know, that is maybe fun to read, but your players are never going to, you know, they're not going to enjoy feeling on the spot and feeling like suddenly they need to be as pithy and glib and classically educated as, you know, these five guys from Oxford and Cambridge and Gilliam. So I don't know. I hope for those that wonder about comedy RPGs, those don't work. I agree for the most part, which is why this is, we describe this as, it's not a comedy RPG, it's a Python RPG, and do with that what you will, I guess.
Because Python doesn't make everybody laugh.
That's right.
All right, excellent. Thank you, Brian and Craig, for a chance to talk to you about this. And I wish you both the best. I can't imagine this not succeeding, but I still wish you the best in this endeavor.
Okay.
I will put a link in the description below for the Monty Python's Cocurricular Medieval Reenactment Program. So everyone out there, thank you very much. Be safe out there and watch out for rabbits and dead parrots. Take care.
Thank you, Manny.
Thanks a lot.